Okay, we are on lesson 5, and we're going to do lesson 5 and 6 in one video if I remember to by the end. But we're doing lesson 5 right now. So, how important was Joseph Lister to the development of surgery? So far we've thought about Jenner, Pasteur, and Koch, Simpson, and now we are in Joseph Lister. Now, when you think about Lister, you need to think. So we have Joseph Lister. When we think of Lister, we think of Listerine. And Listerine, what does it do? Keeps it clean. So the idea is Joseph Lister develops a very effective antiseptic, okay? He is an example of why we kind of clean things in a certain way, and specifically in hospitals and the development of surgery. So if you can just pause the video and do the low stakes quiz. Now, it's the same format as the previous video. So if we look over here, we're thinking about infections. Now, the idea of infections, we need to really understand what an infection is before understanding this lesson. Now, an infection is when you have, obviously there are different examples, but the kind of one that we're thinking about today is when you have a wound and that wound is contaminated by bacteria, okay? Now, when you get, a scrape or you hurt yourself, we've been taught we kind of wipe it. We wipe it down. We make sure it's clean before we put a plaster or before we put a bandage. If you were to kind of fall down, in the playground, you would get up and you'd clean it off. Now, the point of that is you are cleaning off that wound because you do not want any bacteria that was, let's say, in the playground on the floor to infect your wound. So you need to clean it off before you cover it to let it heal. So that's what, and if you don't do that, it can cause the bacteria that goes into your wound can make your wound go worse, and it's called basically an infection. So that's the kind of non-specific science explanation of what an infection is. So the first thing that you have to do is you need to summarize the problems surgeons face dealing with infections over the years using the boxes below. So the story so far, doctors and surgeons had used wine, vinegar, and in some cases honey to keep wounds clean for centuries. But before the germ theory, surgeons did things which were obviously dangerous today. So you just have to read through each one and then summarize for me here what were the problems that they had in regards to infection. What were they doing that was such a bad idea? So this, for example, they reused bandages. Surgeons wouldn't wash their hands before an operation. They wouldn't sterilize equipment before and in between operations and in between patients. They wouldn't keep their areas or clothes clean. Now, this lesson and the next lesson, so I am going to pair them together, is kind of what we know of hospitals today. When we think about a hospital, we think a very, sterile hospital, clean. Things are quite organised, put in place. There wouldn't be this example of doctors not washing their hands. And the whole idea of that is they're trying to reduce the likelihood of an infection, because that would obviously make their job harder and a disease worse. So that's why I want you to write down what problems they were kind of facing that were kind of self-inflicted. The exact same activity, starting off with 1967, Joseph Lister, number 1 to 6, what do you think the order of what he did? And it says here, Listerine, keep it clean, but it's just explaining to you what he essentially did. So what he did, Joseph Lister, he read Pasteur's germ theory and he really believed that, okay, well, bacteria might be causing infection. If it can cause decay, if it can cause disease in silkworms, if it can cause disease in animals, it can cause disease in humans, well, it's got to be causing the infection. So what he did is he began to use carbolic acid. Now, this is the niche knowledge that you need. When you think of Joseph Lister, you need to think he developed an antiseptic, and that was carbolic acid. And carbolic acid was used to treat sewage. It would kind of treat it. So he thought, well, maybe it could be used in the same way. So what he used is this sort of device here, a thin mist to be sprayed over the wound, which limits the infection. And then he would carefully bandage the wound using carbolic acid to that clean the bandaging. So the whole idea of this is he would make sure that things were more sterile. So again, there are two words that we need to know. So aseptic means keeping germs out of surgery before the operation. So e.g. washing your hands, changing your clothes. And antiseptic is keeping the equipment and the wounds clean during the operation. Now, your activity for today's lesson is to think about those two things. But before we even get to that, I just want to give you some examples of what he did. So over here, we have some examples of antiseptic surgery, which I said was keeping equipment and wounds clean, and aseptic surgery, keeping the room keeping the area clean. And here are some examples of what, what people did. So finally, washing surgeons, cleaning clothes, wearing gloves, equipment, sterilizing, bandages soaked in carbolic acid, operating theatres clean. Like I said, these may be incredibly obvious to you now, but it wasn't. People didn't do it at the time. So what you have to do is you have to, in the same way as the previous task with James Simpson, read through this information here. And first of all, you need to use the worksheet to find the positives up here and the negative impacts of carbolic acid. Antiseptic. So they are done for you already, the categories. You just have to read through it and put in the information. So the positive impacts was it led onto aseptic surgery. So by being so focused on antiseptic situations, it led to the idea of we need to keep our operating theatres clean and removing all germs from the operating theatre. It led to more complex surgery. Now, if you have clean equipment and if you're not so worried about infection, it means that you can do more. It's the same as anaesthetic, when by people being asleep, you can do more complex surgery. Again, find the information. The negative impact, so it irritated users. So find out some information to tell me how. It was expensive. Again, explain that. And then Pasteur's germ theory spread slowly. So if he believed Pasteur's germ theory and, took it up straight away, but other people didn't really care for it as quickly as him. So what does that mean for his discovery? If people don't believe in bacteria, why would they believe in his antiseptic, the need for antiseptic or aseptic surgery? Once you've finished, I want you to rank the importance of these impacts. Which impact do you think was the most important for the development of surgery? So do you think it was, there was this one that was already done for you, that it reduced death rates, that it led to aseptic surgery and more surgery or complex surgery, and just annotate which one you think and tell me why. So there are the pictures that I showed you earlier with the summary, if you just want to rewind a second and then pause and put in the definition or test yourself and see if you can figure out yourself. And then I want you to circle or number or highlight which ones you think are examples of antiseptic surgery and aseptic surgery. And then just to finish us off for this lesson, how would antiseptic and aseptic surgery improve medicine and health? So it's just about thinking about what's the point of making sure of that? Like I said, it's obvious to you, just put it in words. Think about assessing that significance. Why is it important? Does it save lives? Does it increase life expectancy? Does it improve safety? Does it, benefit the public? Why is that so important? Complex surgery. And write down a conclusion there. Then when you have finished, I just want you to put in, for me, just 3 points on why, how important Joseph Lister. So your conclusion on whether you think, was Joseph Lister important to the development of surgery. And that's lesson 5. We're going to jump straight into lesson 6. Now, for lesson 6, you would have had a homework set for you, which I will find in a second. Okay, you do have a homework set for you. If you haven't, then you can obviously just email your teacher. But what we're looking at today is how important was Florence Nightingale to the development of hospitals and nursing. Now, you may have heard of Florence Nightingale before in primary school or in Key Stage 3, and we're looking at, well, why was she important? How was she important to development of hospitals and nursing? So again, we're using the same sort of concept of figuring out, well, what's the story so far in hospitals and nurses? We should be able to remember we did a lot of work on what hospitals were like. So in the Middle Ages, write down a summary after reading that. Identify for me the strengths of that time period and the limitations. Do the same thing for the Renaissance period. What were they doing that was quite good? What were they doing that was quite bad? So pest houses in the Renaissance period to limit contagious diseases, that was quite good. What things were bad, so rejecting people to come to hospitals who had infectious diseases, that's bad. And then in the industrial period, what's the summary? Focusing on what were nurses like, what was their training like, what was their reputation like, to kind of help you with that concept just there that I just spoke about. We've got an image on the board and the slide, and it's an early 19th century cartoon showing the typical nurse. She is unconscious from alcohol. So what does that tell you about nursing in the early 19th century? So if she's unconscious from alcohol, the kind of image that they're projecting here, an inference that we can make is that she is perhaps untrained. Perhaps she is not that, she's not what you'd assume the typical nurse if she's not doing her job. She's unconscious when she potentially should be working. And that is exactly what you would have noticed after reading this section here, that, hospitals in the industrial period were overcrowded and dirty. They were known as gateways to death. The rich were treated at home. Poor people really didn't have access to healthcare as much. They just didn't really treat, while they were treating the sick, they didn't, they only really admitted the very poor. And finally, that's a big difference, because now you have hospitals that poor people can be treated at, because before, quite expensive, only the rich can access hospital or medical advice, but still incredibly overcrowded. Very, very hard to make sure that diseases aren't spreading. And this lesson, we're going to see that change. We also talk about here nurses being untrained. So we have Florence Nightingale. Now, Florence Nightingale was a middle-class sort of woman who put together a group of nurses and went out to an area, a hospital in Scutari, which was a local area during the Crimean War, so near the Crimea, and she worked in the Scutari hospital. Now, in the Scutari hospital, she went in and she noticed that actually these soldiers are not really receiving much, there's no sanitation here. And she and her team of 38 nurses washed clothes, provided meals, scrubbed floors, really made sure that the hospitals were sanitized and people were fed and taken care of. And this had a big impact in the Scutari hospital, and really helped people there. Now, when she came back, she thought, well, we need to apply that same knowledge, because nurses have a bigger role. They can't just be these drunken women who are unconscious on their job. We have a bigger role and we can be effective. And essentially what she did is she set up a nursing school at St. Thomas Hospital. She published her notes on nursing, and she set out what the professional nurse should be like. And that was because she wanted to improve nursing as a profession, and it does. The impact it had was it created it made nursing seem like a professional profession. She also thought, well, you know, she thought about the idea of sanitation, and she improved hospital designs, and she used something called the Pavilion Model. Now, Pavilion Model is essentially the idea that it's really big, wide room, you know, separate wards, but wide, big areas, more windows, more space, but separate wards for different diseases. Now, this had a really big impact because, you know, different diseases affect your immune system differently. You might require different things, specialized care. You might, you know, stop infections from each other. So the first activity that you have to do there, which you would have gained that information after reading this, is identify progress for hospitals and nursing using 2 different colours, reading these 2 information boxes, areas. And then what I want you to do is I want you to think, let me just get onto the slide. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to think about so the progress made regarding hospitals and nursing during the 19th century. Now, we've always given you your valid criteria for medicine, you know, saved lives, improved medical knowledge, eradicate disease, public health, etc., etc. But what I want you to do is I want you to bullet point what you think a good nursing and good hospitals look like. What does it mean to have good hospitals? Why would you, so let's say, to give you an example, if I just asked you to create a valid criteria for a good school, you'd be thinking, well, a good school would have good results, good reviews, a good community, students enjoying their learning, students doing well in school, parents being very well informed, a teaching body who are very organised. Okay, so that's what I mean by valid criteria. Thinking about what does that look like. So in the same way, what does good hospitals and good nursing look like? So if I thought about progress in hospitals, I might write down, well, good progress in hospital means that there is a good life expectancy. You might say that there is a good success rate in operations. You could say that there is access for medical care for everyone. You could say that there is trained professionals. Those are all different valid criteria that you could write. And I just want you to do that to practice how to create a valid criteria. Now, after you finish that, that's just practice there. We need to think about, well, what's the progress regarding hospital nursing? And I want you to read through each box in this page, on page 20. And I want you to summarise each box with a title. And then I want you to think about, based on the criteria that you've just written, can you perhaps link any of those boxes to it? So I'm just going to write here, access to medical care, increased life expectancy, success rate with operations, trained professionals. Okay, so we'll leave it there for now. That's my valid criteria. That's what I think good hospital and good nursing looks like. So I might read one. So let's do this one. So by 1900, there were different types of hospitals. There were the small local cottage hospitals, as well as the ones set up by the poor law unions for the very poor. However, it's important to note that the rich and middle classes never went to hospital. So if I was thinking about a title for this, I might write down here that one title for this is the poor law unions set up hospitals for poor. Now, I might think, okay, well, what valid criteria does that link to? That links to that one. So if I was to number them, I might then say, okay, I might number this as this links to number 1. Everyone has access to medical care. And that's what I want you to do for all of those boxes there. When you finish that, quite a long lesson with Florence, but is our last lesson of the industrial period. Once you finish that, I want you to think about how important was Florence Nightingale's development of medicine and nursing, and I want us to think about which factor did what. So first bit, you need to think about which one, role of individuals, government, war or germ theory. In terms of nursing and hospital, which one of those exposed the need for change? Which one drove the reason for change? Which one enabled the reason for change? And which one reinforced the need for change? So it's up to you however you want to do it, but I might argue that the thing that exposed the need for change was when Florence Nightingale went to the war, the Scutari, in the Scutari hospital, saw the difference. She might have been one who drove the change. The government enabled it to happen, so it was able to make sure those changes happened. And the germ theory reinforced it, made sure that people knew why it was happening, and proved why it should happen. Now, once you finish that, you can either just do arrows or number them. You just have to complete the sentences and explain how each factor developed medicine. So after reading this, how did Nightingale affect development of medicine in hospitals? How did the government affect it? How did the germ theory affect it? How did the war affect it? Now, once you finish that, we've already done this in the previous section, so you don't actually need to do this. So what we already said, trained professionals, life expectancy, success rate, access to medical care. And all I want you to do is write down your summary on whether you think hospital nursing improved by the 1900s. Was it to a limited extent, a fair extent, or a large extent? Because you know how much hospitals have changed, and they've changed immensely from the Middle Ages. And by the 1900s, do you think they have changed to such an extent? You need to be thinking about Lister's work with aseptic surgery. You need to be thinking about Pavilion Model. You need to be thinking about the profession of nursing. You need to think about, has it changed substantially? And once you've finished that, you are done. The last section over here is just the knowledge grid. You can do as a revision tool for your review, and you would have been set a review homework online for your industrial one. And that's it for the industrial period. Thank you.